Hello, welcome to A Story for You. We are continuing on reading Little House in the Big Woods, and we are on chapter 6, and this one is called Two Big Bears. One day, Pa said that spring was coming. In the big woods, the snow was beginning to thaw. Bits of it dropped from the branches in the trees and made little holes in the softening snowbanks below. At noon, all the big icicles along the caves of the little house quivered and sparkled in the sunshine, and drops of water hung trembling at their tips. Pa said that he must go to trade the furs of the wild animals that he had been trapping all winter. So one evening he made a big bundle of them, and there were so many furs that when they were tightly packed and tied together, they made a bundle almost as big as Pa. Here's a picture of the bear in the trees. Okay. Huh? I can see myself, so I want to make sure my hair looks okay. Sorry. Very early one morning, Pa strapped a bundle of furs on his shoulders and started to walk to town. There were so many furs to carry that he could not take his gun. Ma was worried, but Pa said that by starting before sunup and walking very fast all day, he could get home again before dark. The nearest town was far away. Laura and Mary had never seen a town. They had never seen a store. They had never even seen two houses standing together. But they knew that in the town there were many houses and a store full of candy and calico and wonderful things, powder and shot and salt and store sugar. And they knew that Pa would trade his furs to the storekeeper for beautiful things from town. And all day they were expecting the presents that he would bring them. When the sun sank low above the treetops and no more drops fell from the tips of the icicles, they began to watch eagerly for Pa. The sun sank out of sight, and the woods grew dark, and he did not come. Ma started supper and set the table, but he did not come. It was time to do chores, and still he had not come. Ma said that Laura might come with her while she milked the cow, and Laura could carry the lantern. So Laura put on her coat, and Ma buttoned it up, and Laura put her hands in the red mittens that hung by the red yarn string around her neck, while Ma lighted the candle with the lantern. Or she lighted the candle in the lantern. Mary was proud of helping Ma with the milking, and she carried the lantern very carefully. Its sides were of tin with places cut in them for the candlelight to shine through. When Laura walked behind Ma on the path to the barn, the tiny bits of candlelight from the lantern leapt all around on the snow. The night was not quite dark, but the woods were dark, and there was a gray light on the snowy path, and in the sky there were a few faint stars. The stars did not look as warm and bright as the little lights that came from the lantern. Laura was surprised to see the dark shape of Sookie, the brown cow, standing in the barnyard gate. Ma was surprised too. It was too early in the spring for Sookie to be let out in the big woods to eat grass. She lived in the barn. But sometimes on warm days, Pa left the door of the stall open so that she could come into the barnyard. Now Ma and Laura saw her behind the bars waiting for them. Ma went up to the gate and pushed against it to open it, but it did not open very far because there was Sookie standing against it. Ma said, "Sookie, get over!" And she reached across the gate and slapped Sookie's shoulder. Just then, one of the dancing bits of light from the lantern jumped between the bars of the gate, and Laura saw long, shaggy black fur and two little glittering eyes. Sookie had thin, short brown fur, and Sookie had large, gentle eyes. Ma said, "Laura, walk back to the house." So Laura turned around and began to walk toward the house, and Ma came behind her. And when they had gone part way, Ma snatched her up, lantern and all, and ran. Ma ran with her into the house and slammed the door. And there's Ma with who they think is Sookie in the barnyard. Whoops. But they are safe now. Then Laura said, "Ma, was it a bear?" "Yes, Laura," Ma said. "It was a bear." Laura began to cry. She hung on to Ma and sobbed, "Oh, will he eat Sookie?" "No," Ma said, hugging her. "Sookie is safe in the barn." "Think, Laura, all those big heavy logs in the barn walls, and the door is heavy and solid, made to keep bears out." "No, the bear cannot get in and eat Sookie." Laura felt better then. "But he could have hurt us, couldn't he?" she asked. "He didn't hurt us," Ma said. "You were a good girl, Laura, to do exactly as I told you, and do it quickly without asking why." Ma was trembling, and she began to laugh a little. "To think," she said, "I've slapped a bear." Now she put supper on the table for Laura and Mary. Pa had not come yet. He didn't come. Laura and Mary were undressing, and they said their prayers and snuggled into the trundle bed. Ma sat by the lamp, mending one of Pa's shirts. The house seemed cold and still and strange without Pa. Laura listened to the wind in the big wood, and all around the house the wind went crying as though it were lost in the dark and the cold. The wind sounded frightened. Ma finished mending the shirt, and Laura saw her fold it slowly and carefully, and then smoothed it with her hand. Then she did a thing she had never done before. She went to the door, pulled the leather latch through its hole in the door so that nobody could get in from outside unless she lifted the latch. She came and took Carrie, all limp and sleeping, out of her big bed. She saw that Laura and Mary were still awake, and she said to them, "Go to sleep, girls. Everything is all right. Pa will be here in the morning." Then she went back to her rocking chair and sat there, rocking gently, holding baby Carrie in her arms. She was still sitting up late, waiting for Pa, and Laura and Mary meant to stay awake too till he came, but at last they went to sleep. In the morning, Pa was there, and he had brought candy for Laura and Mary and 2 pieces of pretty calico to make them each a dress. Mary's was a china blue pattern with a white background, and Laura's was dark red with little gold brown dots on it. Ma had calico for a dress too, and it was brown with a big feathery white pattern all over it. They were happy because Pa had got such good prices for his furs they could afford to get them beautiful presents. The tracks of the big bear were all around the barn, and there were marks of his claws on the walls, but Sookie and the horses were safe inside. All that day the sun shone and the snow melted, and the little streams of water ran from the icicles, which all the time grew thinner and thinner. Before the sun set that night, the bear tracks were only shapeless marks in the wet, soft snow. After supper, Pa took Laura and Mary to his knees, and then he told them a new story. Here we go. The story of Pa and the Bear in the Way. When I went to town yesterday with the furs, I found it hard walking in the soft snow. It took me a long time to get to town, and the other men with furs had come in earlier to do their trading. The storekeeper was busy, and I had to wait until he could look at my furs. Then we had to bargain about the price of each one, and then I had to pick out the things I wanted to take in trade. So it was nearly sundown before I started home. I tried to hurry, but the walking was hard and I was tired, so I had not gone far before night came and I was alone in the big woods without my gun. There were still 6 miles to walk, and I came along as fast as I could, and the night grew darker and darker, and I wished for my gun because I knew that some of the bears had come out of their winter dens, and I had seen their tracks when I went to town in the morning. Bears are hungry and cross at this time of year. You know, they've been sleeping in their dens all winter, and that makes them hungry with nothing to eat, and that makes them thin and angry when they wake up, and I did not want to meet one. I hurried quick as I could by the dark, and by the stars gave a little light, and it was pitch as black in the woods where they were thick, but the open places I could see a little bit. It was dim, but I could see the snowy road ahead a little way, and I could see the dark woods standing all around me, and I was glad when I came into the open place where the stars gave me a little light. All the time I was watching as well as I could for bears, and I was listening for the sounds they make when they go carelessly through the bushes. Then I came to an open place, and there, right in the middle of the road, I saw a big black bear. He was standing up on his hind legs, looking at me, and I could see his eyes shine, and I could see his pig snout, and I could see one of his claws in the starlight. My scalp prickled, and my hair stood up, and I stopped in my tracks and stood still. The bear did not move. He stood looking at me. I knew it would do no good to try to go around him. He would follow me into the dark woods. He could see better than I could. I did not want to fight a winter-starved bear in the dark. Oh, how I wished for my gun. I had to pass that bear to get home, and I thought that if I scared him, he might get out of the road and let me go by. So I took a deep breath, and suddenly I shouted with all my might, and I ran at him, and I waved my arms. He did not move. I did not run very far toward him, I tell you. I stopped and looked, and he stood looking at me. And then I shouted again, and there he stood. And I kept on shouting and waving my arms, and he did not budge. Well, it would do me no good to run away. There were other bears in the woods, and I might meet any one of them. I might as well deal with this one as with another. Besides, I was coming home to Ma and you girls, and I would never get here if I ran away from everything in the woods that scared me. So at last, I looked around, and I got a big club, a good solid heavy branch that I broke from a tree by the weight of the snow in the winter. And I lifted it, and I ran straight at that bear, and I swung my club as hard as I could, and I brought it down bang on his head. And there he stood, for it was nothing but a big black stump. And there's Pa fighting the stump, thinking it was a bear. I had passed it on my way to town that morning, and it wasn't a bear at all. I only thought it was a bear because I'd been thinking all the time about bears and being afraid I'd meet one. It really wasn't a bear at all? Mary asked. No, Mary, it wasn't a bear at all. There I was, yelling and dancing and waving my arms all by myself in the big woods trying to scare a stump. Laura said, ours was really a bear, but we weren't scared because we thought it was Sookie. Pa did not say anything, but he hugged her tighter. Ooh, that bear might have eaten Ma and me all up, Laura said, snuggling close to him. But Ma walked right up to him and slapped him, and he didn't do anything at all. Why didn't he do anything? I guess he was too surprised to do anything, Laura, Pa said. I guess he was afraid when the lantern shone in his eyes. And when Ma walked up to him and slapped him, and he knew she wasn't afraid. Well, you were brave too, Laura said. Even if it was only a stump, you thought it was a bear, and you'd have hit him on the head with a club, even if it had been a bear, wouldn't you, Pa? Yes, said Pa, I would. You see, I had to. Then Ma said it was bedtime, and she helped Laura and Mary undress and button up their red flannel nightgowns, and they knelt down by the trundle bed and said their prayers. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. It's really a very sad prayer. Anyway, sorry guys. Ma kissed them both and tucked the covers in around them, and they lay there a while looking at Ma's smooth parted hair, her hands busy with sewing in the lamplight. Her needle made clicking sounds against the thimble, and the thread went softly swish through the pretty calico that Pa had traded furs for. Laura looked at Pa, who was greasing his boots. His mustache and his hair and his long brown beard were silky in the lamplight, and the colors of his plaid jacket were happy and gay. And he whistled cheerfully while he worked, and then he sang, the birds were singing in the morning, and the myrtle and ivy were in bloom, and the sun o'er the hills was a-dawning. 'Twas then I laid her in the tomb. It was a warm night, and the fire had gone to the coals on the hearth, and Pa did not build it up. All around the little house at the big woods there were little sounds of falling snow, and from the eaves was the drip, drip of the melting icicles. It was a little while the trees would be putting out their baby leaves, and all rosy and yellow and green, and there would be wild flowers and birds in the wood. There would be no more stories by fire at night, but all day long Laura and Mary would run and play among the trees, for it would be spring. That's all for our story today. Be sure to let your parents know to like and subscribe, and if you have any comments that you want to talk to me about the story, or questions that you have, or information that you have, you can tell your parents and they can put it in the comments. And then if they set up their phone or their computer, when they subscribe, then they can click on the bell, and that'll tell you every time I put a new video up. I enjoy getting this time with you. Bye-bye.